Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the AI Sana podcast. I am so excited to introduce to you one of our friends who has expertise in an area that I know very little about. So, usually I know that the topics that we have, I have a little bit of insight and I kind of cue. And in this case, I'm entirely relying on Juliana to help me understand what is happening and in turn help you understand what's happening in this space. Today, we're talking about the market map of decentralized finance and decentralized AI and the intersection of decentralized finance and AI. Juliana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You can't imagine that how excited I am because this is a topic that is so opaque, and if you don't know it, like you don't even know where to start and all the
That's
terms.
completely true. It is also like fairly segmented from the rest of everything. And it's like, if you're in, you're in. But
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
agree.
And if you're in, you know what the terms are to start searching, and then you know what the
Mm,
terms mean to keep searching.
yeah.
But if you're not, you can't even Wikipedia it. So
Yeah, that's true. And also, if you do start to even just like try to understand, it's like a whole different vocabulary as well. And as somebody who also works with just like a lot of people in TradFi that just like are also have not crossed the chasm into, decentralized finance. Well, it's funny, the terms evolve. It was DeFi, now it's DefAI, right? Like we just keep going like further and further. But it's very important to me that also like there is a bridge, right?
yes,
Like it is very important, especially as like the wealth gap is widening. You have to participate, like especially with AI and crypto blockchain, and have an opinion about like where this stuff is headed.
yes,
Very important to me. So
yes.
happy to be here.
Love it, love it. And you're already starting to throw words out there that we're like, oh, that's jargon that comes from that space that we're not using. For example, traditional finance, TradFi. Now we've learned a new term.
If I say anything, interrupt me because I also hate acronyms, but like I don't even notice them at this point, right? Like TradFi, traditional finance,
Yes.
which I don't know, we speak, even as VCs, we live in the future, right? So when I say TradFi, I feel like we're talking about like 1990. It's like we have been a long time since. And also, there's a lot of VCs that still like only invest in TradFi and like don't invest in crypto. I actually had a fund manager the other day ask me what a stable coin was. And that like shocked me to my core as a fund manager who was investing in the financial future.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. Well, for this topic, for this topic and for our audience and for me, you might have to explain terms like stable coin, right? But for listeners, you can tell based on Julia and my dynamic already. I know that usually I speak fast. Juliana also speaks very
Okay.
fast, and we can
Noted.
both be very worry. And post production, I'm sure post production, amazing post production team will slow us down.
Okay. Great.
So, before we begin jumping into the market map, etc., you've already alluded to this a little bit, but you're an investor. I know that you're also a founder. Who are you? How'd you get here? What do you want to be when you grow up?
First of all, I love that question. Hi everybody, I'm Juliana. I know a little bit of background about the audience that is here, and I know a lot of it is student and educational. And I think, my personal viewpoint on the world is just build something, get started, start today. It's very easy to do so on the side. And now more than ever, right? Like any person is now technical, right? So I think that is just like a very important like thing for me to say. But I've been at the cross intersection of finance and growth for most of my time. My first experience with startups was when I was in uni, and I raised a bit of capital for a company that I didn't really particularly have a strong like thing for. So I gave the money back to investors. And from that point on, I got involved with an angel investing organization. And it was really fun to me at the time. Like I was also kind of involved in private equity, and that was just the most boring thing in the world at the time. And honestly, like I think anything in business and across the spectrum is like glorified sales at the end of the day. It's just what are you selling, right? And like who's buying? I think is just like the most important like question to ask consistently. And so from that, I was like heavily involved in this angel organization, got to really understand deals as somebody who had also just raised capital, realized there was like a big communication barrier too, right? And a lot of people that were in tech and knew about tech and kind of the same thing now, right? Like the people that are in Web3 know about Web3. And again, like crossing the chasm is just like a more difficult thing that I didn't really realize, right? And so at the time, I then went over to Asia, actually, as kind of just like a personal research project to see how they were also looking at things, what their opinions on, how people were building in the space, what was interesting over there, and got involved at a high growth robo advisory fintech firm, which I mean, this might all be jargon to you guys, but at the time, also kind of leading growth on like the financial prospect. We had big banks as clients where we're also teaching individuals what an ETF was, right?
Mm.
Like what this very basic concept to me, if you were lucky enough to have known it, to a room full of adults, right? And like that to me was just like very enlightening, and just about how like financial education is taught and how it's like everywhere, but also like nowhere, right? At once. So like if you're in it, you're in it. You can go down this rabbit hole, but otherwise it is difficult to like jump in and start, right? And a lot of people are like, okay, well, how do I start investing? How do I start that? How do I start this? And as somebody who like has invested in a lot of different things from like across the alt sorry, jargon, the alternative investment category, right? Like I was just like testing things and like investing in startups by myself, looking at what people were building globally, investing in crypto, art, luxury goods, right? Like anything that I felt was underpriced and could go upwards, which is a defined alternative investment separate from like public markets and everything else. VC, crypto, all of these are alternatives. So from like there, I then got involved with a company called Tribe Theory. Tribe Theory was a company that was on Siam Hill in Singapore. If you are familiar with Singapore, I met the founder, Vikram Bharati, who was then at that point launching to Bali and Bangalore. And he approached me and was like, I want to fund. And I was like, okay, great. What does that look like? He's like, I don't know. And I was like, cool, cool, cool. Like, let's make it happen. And so we then raised some capital, expanded to 8 global locations. And then from there, 30. And then off of the back of that, we also the concept of Draper Startup House was entrepreneurial hospitality. And what that essentially means is for founders that were raising in Southeast Asia, they had to come through Singapore to do that. And they wanted more community than, say, like a Holiday Inn, but it couldn't afford the Ritz or anything. So physical hostels. That's what we were doing for founders. Like that was, and that's actually how I found Vikram in the first place and how that all started everything. We raised
To put me on,
around, yep. Yeah, so in 2020, don't quote me on the date, but it was early 2020, we received an investment from Tim Draper, and who, if you're unfamiliar, is a very big Bay Area investor who has invested in multiple like category things, but they take a specific focus on deep tech, a lot of decentralization, a lot of blockchain, anything weird, biotech, the kind of like the misfit founders of sorts. And at the time, he also wanted to take his brand more internationally, and he felt he could do it faster with us since we already had a head start. And our argument also at the same time was this is a fantastic deal funnel, right?
yeah.
We are attracting talent from every interesting, nascent, hard to reach market around the world, right? Like we had launched in Yangon. We were like in very like different areas everywhere. And so it was really fun. You know, like we got to see many different things. Part of our team did Latin America. A lot of us did, like a good amount of the team took on India. We had Southeast Asia. We were expanding in Europe. And so at that point, we then decided that it was the best funnel for us to also start supporting these founders. The thesis at the time, the hypothesis, right, at the time that COVID was dramatically changing everything for a company that was, relying on like physical events and community was just, kind of pushed the investment part of this really far forward. And for that reason, right, like we were already remote, we were already global, but now we had the opportunity that everybody understood what that meant and the opportunity for remote teams to like be able to fundraise internationally and to like scale global markets. And so our hypothesis at the time was, to support these founders that are raising capital but haven't made it to Silicon Valley yet. And it was kind of the reverse strategy of take Silicon Valley and like bring it globally. We were globally and we were coming back here with our now base as Draper with the headquarters, right? And so I was kind of like at this time there was also a good amount of funds that were kind of doing a similar model. Some of them were pulling out of Asia, some of them were pulling out of Europe. It is very difficult to do personalized and localized venture investing at the global scale,
Mhm.
right? Like it is,
Mhm.
and I mean, a few years later, the world has not slowed down. Every single category of location fund, Yangon is a good example because we launched and then they had a coup, right? And then we're in Manila and there's a flood that wipes out everything. And these were the things that we were like actively dealing with as we're trying to like do deals. And like at the time, everybody's ecosystem looked very different. And it was our personal responsibility with our local teams to know about all of these places. And so I think naturally our portfolio kind of ended up being in three major geographies. It was South Asia, actually, excuse me, I'll say Southeast Asia, which was about a third of our deals. A third of our deals were also India, and then the rest of the third, the Americas. And I say that being North and South. And that was kind of like how it just naturally broke down. But I also think, going from that and raising a second fund, I then realized that I am an operator who invests. I don't want to be fundraising at the institutional level for the rest of my life. I had FOMO every time I spoke to a founder. I'm like, I think I can help you guys,
Yeah.
and like that was kind of just a sign for me to step back in the operating space. So now I am in stealth, so I unfortunately cannot mention what I am building, but I am in the space of decentralized financial artificial intelligence and tackling systems of financial sovereignty and how we get access to capital, what it looks like, who owns us, who do we pay a mortgage to, who do we pay this to, right? Like we're all owned by somebody. And overall, the concept of decentralization is to sort of tackle that barrier. So I think that is long story long. I don't know if you have any questions on that.
So you again, you come from such a global view, come to us from such a global view, and you know a topic that is so on the frontier. When we talk about frontier tech, like decentralized finance AI is frontier of frontier AI. So help us understand under this umbrella, like what does that mean? What is decentralized? What is decentralized finance? What's decentralized AI?
Yeah, so the concept of like decentralization is that it is not like one organization. It's kind of like decentralizing like a middleman, so to speak, where the power then goes to the individual consensus.
Hmm.
A good example of this, I'd say, is a bank. This is a classic case of a centralized institution where you have to go through a bank to get capital, right? And the ownership facilities around what that looks like to a person, to an individual person, is not within the power of the network, right? It's
Yeah.
in within the power of said institution, said system. And I think there's a lot of people that end up in crypto for a lot of different reasons. I mean, like any other industry, you get the riffraff, right? You get the hackers, you get this, which has I think tainted and scared a lot of people away from this industry and this organization. Um, and that happens. It will continue to happen, right? Market movers, as soon as people get into politics, they'll start manipulating things. But that also happens in traditional finance,
Yeah.
right? There are still criminals, there's still hacks, there are still all of these problems. And so I think for me, the concept of decentralization is ownership,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of what it comes back to for like I think a lot of the industry, and autonomy over certain things. And I mean, there's a lot of different things that have decentralization concepts. It's not just finances or other things. It's security, it's cybersecurity, it's like even just operations, right? It's voting mechanisms, DAOs, right? Like, okay, it's the mindset shift of, okay, this central organization has too much power and we disagree, right?
Yeah.
What is a better mechanism stake for the people that it's actually supposed to help, and the
Yeah.
governance to support that is the
I
best
love
way.
that
Yeah.
concept, what you said about ownership, because it's ownership of the value chain and not having
Mm,
your entire value be decided by and delegated by one party. So let's say,
yeah.
for example, if you think about the food value chain, right?
Mm.
You right now in most communities, the food value chain is very centralized in grocery stores, but you do start seeing in some emerging, especially in emerging economies
Yes.
and some emerging pockets of developed economies, where people are now doing kind of like community food groups or community farm groups or farm to table. And so you can buy direct from individual farmers maybe somebody sells eggs, somebody sells,
Yes.
chicken, somebody sells. And so you're starting, one, that is an infrastructure that is clearly already decentralized and it's very prominent in emerging markets. It has been more centralized in developing markets, but developing markets are now seeing the value of decentralizing it. So you're seeing all of these community groups, community farm groups kind of pop up. So I think that concept of decentralization is something that we are familiar with, but in the finance space, it's not. And what you said about, you decentralize finance gets a bad name because of some of the negative PR around the more fringe cases of crypto. And you mentioned crypto, but we haven't defined cryptocurrency and how that's different than decentralized finance. So the original question was, what's decentralization? And I think you've covered
Mhm.
that. Decentralized finance, we've covered that. So what is crypto and what does that mean in the context of decentralized finance?
Yeah. So also the concept of decentralization is no like single point of failure, right? And I think that comes with like trust in systems. If you look at systems around the world, and as somebody who's spent a lot of different times spending in like very different government, different situations, the effect that a single point of failure has affects everybody at scale,
Mhm.
whether it's a bank failure, right? The SVB crisis, we had just closed our fund at that point, and all of our portcos banked with them because they're all international, right? Like that is a single point of failure, right?
Yes.
Like that is because somebody made these decisions and
Yeah.
it didn't work out. That affects everybody, right? So that's, I think, the concept of the no single point of failure. And I think it comes down to a personal stance of what is your opinion on who's in charge and do you have trust in the system. And I think we are evolving at such an exponential rate, right? Like the trust in systems is not there,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just we have taken a hit after hit after hit, and not just like the US economy, right? Like global economies, like a single point of a US market making affects global communities. And so that's just like taking it one step further. And it's like, do you trust that these organizations, these systems have your best interests? What
Yeah.
are the incentives? Who's managing the money?
Yep.
What is the incentive for somebody in government to be reelected? And are their decisions in your best interest or are they in their own interest?
Yeah. And
So
aside,
all of
even separate from incentives, going back to what you said about single point of failure, I mean, you hear of, like, for example, like Cloudflare failure causing the majority of the internet to just be inaccessible, right?
AWS goes out,
Yeah,
everything's
exactly, exactly. So then, I mean, as we start thinking about the financial infrastructure that powers the world, can we really afford to have it be so centralized that one single person who in that one single organization could fundamentally take the world off?
absolutely. And that's you just, I think, summarized it completely conceptually, right? And so going back to your question on cryptocurrency, like what is a digital asset? What is a token? What is this specific commodity?
What is even like what is the definition of a cryptocurrency? Let's start there.
I don't know. I'm not a dictionary, but essentially a cryptocurrency is also considered an alternative to traditional. And actually there's a lot that has happened in crypto in general, right? And a lot of people I think originally had the opinion that this is going to be a hedge against, other currency and a way there's a lot of day traders, there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of money to be lost. If you've been in crypto long enough, you have lost money, you've sent it to a wrong, you might have been hacked. Like it's just kind of a part of the early adoption curve. But it's all part of it and you can't take it personally. Well, I think, it's essentially also to be said that crypto was supposed to be uncorrelated to traditional currency in general. Now the joke is if markets are up, crypto's down. If current other money's down, crypto's still down. So it's just like the correlation mechanisms have still been like still very dependent on certain organizations. We
Yeah,
haven't really seen that separation, right? If one big hack happens, crypto's affected.
yeah,
BlackRock decides to change their mind, crypto's affected, right?
yes.
Like single points of decision, which are just like moving the price. But the concept of a digital asset in general is the concept of the blockchain, right? And like to not be too complicated about it, it's just another form of technology. It's just another way in which things are built on the concept of decentralization, right?
Mhm.
There is not a central bank of Bitcoin that is managing the price fluctuations. The concept of crypto is that there is a concrete supply, and because of that, it drives price and it drives demand. There's a lot of, again, bad use cases of, these whales are moving money and like, all right, for that reason, everybody's now scared. The fear exists on both sides of the aisle, though. Any government thing that comes out, stocks go down. And so I don't think we've seen a complete separation of both. But what I will say on the topic of cryptocurrency and maybe your own personal involvement in it is that it is hard to kind of get started, right? On like the mental side of things, right? The idea of this really risky asset, which has, depending on who you're asking, failed to take like very solid use cases is tough when you're like, okay, well, this is super risky, right? But on the technological layer underneath of blockchain, as a fund manager, the amount of money that is being invested into blockchain companies is astronomical. There's so many crypto funds, so many blockchain funds. And so I think there's still people that have the opinion that this is going to go away, right? Like this might not be here tomorrow. And as somebody who is a venture investor, our job is to live 10 years in the future, right? Our
Yeah,
job is to like
blockchain
predict out.
blockchain as a technology is not
It
going nowhere.
is.
It's
It's
not going
exactly
nowhere.
it. Yeah.
It's like
And that's
saying, so many people have invested in Fusion and Fusion's not here yet. Fusion's going to go away.
mm,
Fusion's not going nowhere.
correct. And like another example is like my father who grew up watching like this American television show, The Jetsons with the flying car. And he's like, if we were so advanced, we should have this by now. And like, I have seen tests of flying cars, right? Like this, there's so much that is happening in the background and so much capital that is going into this industry. It's
Yeah.
not going away,
No.
right? And like the fear that is sold to individuals across everything, not just blockchain and crypto, like it's not going anywhere. And like it will continue to fluctuate
Yeah.
time and time again until like again a chasm has been crossed and there's a long ways to go. And I think the
Yeah.
question is sort of when does that like people like shift? When does that chasm cross?
I
But
want
there's a
to
lot of
ask you a
opportunity
question. You
there.
introduced another term that we hadn't defined yet, but before I go into that, this comment you said about cryptocurrency being an alternative asset and that
Mm,
alternative asset itself is in the form of a currency that's not tied to traditional finance currency. And a lot
yeah,
of traditional finance currency is pegged like a supply of gold or supply of something
right.
physical. And in this case, cryptocurrency is an alternative digital asset that is not pegged to a physical supply of something. What it is pegged to, the value is pegged to is twofold. One is a limited supply of this currency to begin with, and two is based on the value is driven by demand. So it's
Correct.
almost like the inverse of what you think about what happens with inflation in traditional currency. So if people give these examples like your grandfather saying, when I was a kid, bread used to be $1 and now bread is, $5.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrency is works in the opposite manner, right? It used to be that you could buy something for a cryptocurrency. And if you remember, sorry, a Bitcoin. So if you remember like the early days of Bitcoin where some gas stations will say, we'll take Bitcoin and a
Right.
gallon, you can buy a gallon gas for 1 Bitcoin. And you're like,
Mhm.
that's like a great deal. That's a lot. Like, like one Bitcoin is worth so much today. Like that is an expensive gallon of gas. And
Yeah.
so when you think about kind of defining that, I think value in that cryptocurrency only goes up if people outside of the centralized institution, the centralized institution managing Bitcoin cannot say the value of Bitcoin has gone up. The only way that the value of Bitcoin goes up is if the global populace decides that there is demand for Bitcoin. That is it. If it's
Completely. It's
decentralized,
completely backed by scarcity. 100%.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And demand, right? And so
Hmm.
then what you've done is you've put the power behind driving value into the hands of the individual populace who's participating in that economy. So I
Yeah.
love that when you said ownership, decentralization of ownership, this is a perfect example of decentralization of ownership. Now,
Yeah.
in the term, you said blockchain. What is blockchain?
Yes. Again, I am not a dictionary. But blockchain essentially is just the technology underneath the hood, right? It's basically like what all of this runs on. There's again, like I know that you have invested in layer ones, layer twos, and all of this, like I think for the everyday individual who has a life, maybe you work in tech, to be honest, all you need to know is that it's what powers everything. I don't like to necessarily talk about in-depth details because it gets really confusing very fast when you're not in the space, right?
Yeah.
And for me,
It's
I just
Yeah, I think for our students, they're a technical audience. It's
okay.
it's an enabling tech stack. That's what it is.
Yep.
If you think about it
Completely.
in jargon, it's enabling tech stack with the ability to do compute and calculate calculations in a way
Yep.
that is what's called
Proofs. Yep.
immutable.
Hmm.
Immutable, you cannot change it. It is fully traceable. It is unchangeable. And so that record keeping is prime for a lot of things, one of which is tracing the value of and the transfer of money, like in the case of cryptocurrency applications. But it's also being used for a lot of other things, like um, you know, the ability to track contracts, the ability to
Yep.
distribute, compute. Like these, there's lots of ways, but it's an underlying tech stack that is built atop of an immutable ledger concept.
Yes. And that's exactly it, right? And I have I remember when Christmas I gifted everybody an NFT. And I did this knowing it would spark a conversation. I didn't actually anticipate how much of a conversation it would spark, but of like the concept and what this is. What is it? Is it useless? What does non-fungible even mean? And that wasn't the point. The point was is to get them involved.
Yeah.
And
So
I
what
think
is
a
an
lot
NFT? So what is an NFT?
an NFT is just like a non-fungible like token of sorts, right? It's like you own it. It's backed by again the same concept of everything else we're talking about, but it's non-fungible, right? So like you own it, you own it.
Yeah.
So
Can't
I
can't modify it, and you're
can't
the only
modify it,
person who can
right?
transfer it.
The
Yeah.
tamper system, right? That's again to your point, like everything that is like very trackable, very traceable. And I think my comment for students that aren't participating in it or people that like haven't yet involved themselves, even everything that we've said on the concept of what this technology is, what is backing it, what is all of this.
Yeah.
I think there is no better system to understand it than to participate in it.
Yeah.
Open up an account. That there's so many. Most traditional finances now also allow crypto, right? And
Yeah.
like I think a lot of people still think that you have to buy a whole Bitcoin,
Yeah.
or a whole like you have to. And I'm like, you can buy $1, right?
Yeah.
Like you can. That might not outpace the gas fees, but you get my point, right? Like you can like dabble very quickly, and even just like owning like $20 worth of Bitcoin and like watching it move and just then having own it, start paying attention to certain news things,
Yeah.
right? Like you don't need to know every single detail, right? Like for you to have investments in public stocks and ETFs, you don't need to work in the industry,
Yeah.
right? I think you just have to start slowly participating, let go of this fear narrative, which I think is plaguing the entire world. And AI is another thing that a lot of people are afraid of, right? And there's, I think, valid reasons for that, but it's not stopping, right? Like it
Yeah.
is not slowing down, right? So now is the time to play around,
Yeah.
right? Like just get started, right? And I do think this will ultimately drive the wealth disparity. Are you participating in AI, right? Like, are you using this to like do your workflows to be better productivity? I was speaking with somebody the other day. I won't mention the company that she's at, but she told me that she's like currently training agents to do her job. I'm like, you are
Good.
being replaced, like
Good for her.
yes,
Good for her,
yeah.
right?
And are you like even learning this process? But I am like trying to also get across that like this is phenomenal knowledge, but you are training your replacement.
Yeah.
So participate, right? Like be a part of it. Go build something. Start like just start. And she's like, well, I have this idea for this startup. I'm like, start.
Do it.
Like everybody's technical now. Like I think that is just like where, and I'm an extremely early adopter, to be very fair. So I know like there's a curve, there's laggards, I mean, I'm working on my grandparents, right? Like I'm still like, you guys, here's your account, this is what you own. And they're like, we don't get it, like it's not back to gold. And I'm like, you don't need to, just like, participate.
Yeah, gold. I don't think gold is back to gold nowadays. Like
No.
gold is right, driven entirely by the public market, which is not backed by gold.
Right. Gold is also an alternative asset, by the way. So, like,
Juliana, I thank you so much for walking through that. I know that that was a lot of definitions to get started. You mentioned that, you said decentralized finance is kind of that frontier of technology that will at some point become a little bit more commonplace than what it has been today. And you said AI, same thing for encouraging AI. So we've talked about decentralization, we've talked about decentralized finance, we've defined cryptocurrency, we've defined blockchain. What does decentralized AI
yeah. So, I mean, decentralized AI, again, is exactly what it sounds like,
mean?
right? Like, that is the whole concept of the practical use cases for AI and decentralization span like a good amount of different things. To your point of like the agents, this, right? It's just kind of like, what is AI being used for, and where is it helpful? On the investor standpoint, looking at other deals that have been, pitched, we're seeing a lot of stuff that is workflows, right? We're seeing a lot of other things that are trying to make these companies operate faster, solve like certain problems that are
Mm,
just like expensive. Right? Like
mm,
that is like where this all like comes from. People that are building in the space, I think, the picks and the shovels
yeah,
are huge, right? And again, there's this whole AI fear narrative, but also for those reasons, there's so many problems to solve, right?
yeah,
Like just
yeah.
like across the spectrum. Um,
So on that, I apologize for continue to interrupt you.
no, go
Um,
ahead.
so on that concept of decentralization and applying it to AI, if we think about the centralization of AI, we think about you said like the tooling and the products and
Mm,
the solutions, and a lot of what we have right now is if you think about just like the development tooling infrastructure, compute is fairly centralized, right? There's a handful of GPU providers. There's that are actually providing physical chips. If you want to do on-prem development, there's a handful of major cloud providers. And if you want access to GPUs via cloud, there's a handful of those that are available. But if you think about the decentralization for it, at AIC, my firm Alpha Intelligence Capital, we invested in a company called Zero Gravity Labs, which
yeah.
is a decentralized AI compute platform. And the idea there is there are a number of individuals who own their own GPUs. Now, your GPU that you're not using is excess compute that other people could leverage, but there is not a good mechanism for connecting individuals with small amount of compute with other individuals or other corporates who are either demanding small or large amounts of compute. So how do you, one, get access to the decentralized availability of compute as well as the decentralized demand for compute? And then how do you build the infrastructure that's necessary to pair up all of that compute together so that instead of, let's say, you have a GPU and I have a GPU, what if you needed two GPU worth of work? Maybe we could use both mine and yours in order to be able to complete your work. So I
Yeah.
think in what you said about decentralization of AI, those there's a lot of that work now being done. And then on the tooling layer and on the product layer, there are starting to be integrations of AI enabled decentralized smart contracts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, you know,
And I think what you said, like again, like nailing it on the head, it's almost like, even to simplify it further, right? It's like decentralizing the communication of just like how things are operating. And actually, I have seen so many like decentralized cloud companies recently, so many decentralized space this company, right? Like actually everything now right now is in space, but like that's all like part of it, right? And it's like, how do we access and leverage this miscellaneous like thing that has value, right? How do we like fix these communication metrics so that it works, right? And it's not coming back to the single point of whatever failure.
yeah, right, right. I love it. It makes a lot of sense because all of the benefits that you think of when we talk about food or finance applies to the technical infrastructure and community that's needed for AI. Now, the topic today is a combination of all of these concepts, which is decentralized finance AI. So when we talk about decentralized finance AI, if we put all of those concepts together, what is that?
So it looks like a few different things, right? There's a lot of different categories from risk and compliance to portfolio management, right? To the security of these financial institutions, agentic execution, like intent routing, right? Credit underwriting, anything, all of that counts, right?
Mm,
And again, there are so many like problems to tackle and the concept of DefAI, right? And I think, there's the on ramping, the off ramping. How can we like there's actually some crazy things. Like I have heard of people like vibe coding smart contracts recently, and that is crazy. And I just like can't even like get into again the evolution of like how this is evolving. And another example I would like to use again without naming names is we're at a point where I mean you're we're marketing to agents.
yeah.
We are like selling to agents, right? Like like what a time. Like that is like so insane. And to be vibe coding smart contracts, right? To have this technology be good enough to even like try that,
Yeah.
right? It's just like we are like and again, I kind of lose the sense of like where's everybody else at? Like, what does everybody else know, right? Like, where is just like everybody else when some people like still don't own crypto, right? And see, that's where I'm just like, we got work to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, we
It
have
it
like a
does feel
bridge
a
to
little bit
cross,
like yeah, it feels like a little bit like you're building the flat plane as you're flying it, but the plane is
right?
a little bit ahead of where you wanted to fly or you
Completely,
thought you would fly.
yeah.
On what you said about, marketing to agents, and I'll comment on that. A lot of the internet now is accessible through agentic search. And so the traditional form of marketing that we typically think of, very rank based, search SEO based, et cetera, like that is now no longer relevant. And in the traditional sense that we think of it.
Yeah,
Because
SEO,
what
SEM.
originally we thought of as like eyeballs matter and relatability matters now is about relevancy of certain snippets of content that you've created and how that ranks in the ranking of relevancy based on how agentic search understands the prompt and the semantic behind the prompt of the search.
Yes. Hmm.
And so when you say, it sounds a little bit dystopian to say we're now marketing to agents. It is true. We are
It
marketing
is
to
true.
because yeah, because like if let's say for example, if the students are using Perplexity AI and they're saying, what's the best new personal laptop, right? Or personal computing device. That is being translated because when you say personal computing device versus laptop, the translation might be you meant a personal computing like desktop, a personal computing laptop, you might be thinking of a tablet, a phone, etc., right? And so the way in which the agent understands the context and of your question, the semantic of your question really matters. And then the way in which the agent and the agentic search API is programmed to identify what is relevant versus what's not relevant, what is the nearest neighbor versus not, like that matters. So all of a sudden, now you're optimizing for agentic search and not so much optimizing for the initial question that the human query has created.
Yeah. And I think to your point of like, it sounds dystopian, whether or not it sounds dystopian, it's here, right? Like, I actually think, and obviously we're both in venture, we're long term optimists,
Yes.
right? Like, we have the fundamental belief that this is making the world a better place,
Yeah.
it's making us more efficient. All of that to say, like, there are the laggards, those that, like, struggle to adopt. Like, I do think we will see sort of, like the separation sorts. And I mean, on the concept of like dystopian, utopian, we're marketing agents, like vibe coding smart contracts, like what does all that look like? I mean, I think what is also just like pushing this world into even further, like almost fear and chaos is like also the regulation behind it. And what is it doing? How is it catching up, right? Like, who is knowledgeable in government to even declare something that is, actionable for this industry in a way that makes sense? And it's so interesting to see some of my friends that are just like not in the industry at all. Actually, another friend was visiting from New York City, and after they took a Waymo, which is the self-driving car, he was like, I feel like a country bumpkin back in New York, right? Like, and it's just like, again, what is, and I challenge myself, right? I'm like, what is the future and what is now? And like, where does everybody fit into that and how can they participate? And so that they go along with it, right? And like, I think that is, again, the concept of decentralization is the context of like democratization, right? Like
Yes.
all of this is for us now, right? Like we're in the face of, as I'm building a new startup, like this is the first time since like pre-fund where we have access to like consumer facing LLMs. The
Yeah.
rate at which I am able to build is,
Yes.
I don't even want to put a number to it because it's that astronomically higher, right?
Yeah.
Like the ability to iterate, the ability to like even use AI to test things and like not only test things, but like put it out there. I know businesses that have like, a holding shield, but just multiple AI like landing sites to see what's sticking that is completely integrate with Stripe, and they're
Yeah.
making money. And right, like, but to be fair, they're serving a need, right? These
Yeah.
people are paying for it because they find value in it. And so that is where, again, I have that this is valuable to everybody if one participates, right?
Yes.
And
And one,
that's, I
and
think,
that's such
where
a
I come
big
back.
caveat. It's such a big caveat is that you, to benefit from it, you have to participate.
Completely.
I I want to take us back to, you started mentioning a couple of things. You mentioned
Mm,
risk and compliance and portfolio
mm,
management, da, 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 da. And so when we think about decentralized finance, our students will have another podcast guest who will talk about just the traditional finance infrastructure in the market in
mm,
traditional finance. And so in traditional finance, I think, you have some of the similar patterns, but a different separate set of different nuances in some of these categories. So, in traditional finance, you can think about kind of the buyer, the payer, the receiving institution, and the all of the things that are involved in that three-party transaction. Again, the
mm-hmm.
buyer, the payer, the receiving institution that mediates the transaction between the buyer and the payer. But when we think about traditional finance, we think about the regulation, the fraud detection, the compliance, the audit. As one of our previous speakers have spoken to, we think about the data analysis, the asset management, the quantification of those assets and the asset values. And then we talk a lot about kind of technologies that are enabling for the institutions that are participating in this three-party transaction. And then last but not least, we think about the personal finance side of it, right? So
Yeah.
there's always a person, but there's obviously corporate finance, but then there's also like the people involved in it. So how do you think about the people powering the finance? In decentralized AI finance, DFAI. What are kind of major categories that you are starting to see emerge, and why are those categories starting to become more?
Yeah, I think again, to your point of building the plane as the plane is flying, I think that is specifically true about this industry as it is, right? Anytime somebody will like, I mean, also in Def AI, right? Like these like platforms, like agents are trading,
Yeah.
bots are buying, right? Like there's platforms where again, like type in like what you want and like it's done, right? They're tracking, they're executing. So I think on the concept of retail like consumer finance, a lot of portfolio management, but I've also seen a lot in terms of like budgeting, for example, personal, like, okay. And I think a lot of people have started exploring this as well. Like copy your bank statements, throw it in there, see what it suggests. Right?
Mm,
Like this concept of like making yourself more effective to make more money, I think is a big category. How do you sort of, what have you missed? What are your spending patterns? Right? Like how will I make more money based on all of this data that I have accessible to me? So that's kind of on the personal, like consumer end. I've seen a lot in portfolio construction. I've seen a lot in like redistributing on terms of, where the AI is trained to think it's going, right? And
Mm.
so that, I mean, that only gets better, right? As all of this AI will only get better. I think a lot of it's still pretty imperfect, to be honest, as
Cool.
a
So,
lot of things right
a
now.
question on this. A question on this. I think when you hear the term DFAI and the decentralization of finance in the regards to AI, my first question is it AI for decentralized finance, or is it decentralized finance for AI?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. It's everything,
It's both
right?
of those
Like,
things. Okay,
I
it's
mean,
both.
it's both of those things. And
And
I
so
mean,
then in what you discussed about, private portfolio management,
mm,
budgeting, redistribution, on the cutting edge of death AI, are you seeing this as leveraging AI so far? So far, are you seeing the more prominent applications in this being AI utilization for management of decentralized alternative assets?
yes, I mean, to be fair, we're seeing everything. Right? Like there's like there every lot of things are being tackled, and in terms of like, and what and the use cases I'm also saying are related to blockchain, right? So in terms of like on-chain activity, on-chain credit scores, how are the AIs making this better? How are they doing it faster in terms of, regulatory things and like on-ramping, off-ramping? What is the AI also learning about behavior, but also how are people building with it, right?
Or
In
optimizing
terms,
compute to reduce gas fees in the way that you think about like traditional compute orchestration, reducing the compute the cost of underlying compute for inference. You can think of AI being used in that same way for gas fees, right?
yeah, absolutely. And right, like gas fees are still a problem, energy consumption, a problem, right? There's so many problems that people are like identifying, trying to work on. And I think again, some of it is helpful, some of it is not helpful, but I'd rather see attempts than nothing. But yeah, to your point, I think people probably use Def AI differently, right? But like, I mean, it's kind of the same as like D whatever, D insert acronym, right? Like DSI, cybersecurity. Like there's so many different like acronyms. I think they're just, and again, people use them differently. I don't think they should be like, I don't know, maybe I'm using it wrong. That's fair too.
No, no. I think that you see so much of this, and I think, where my question comes from, and I'm sure our students are kind of wondering is if they wanted to participate, what are kind of the major trends for them to read up on now versus
Mm,
where are things headed? And it sounds like from
okay.
the way that you've answered this is that everything's happening all at once, but the more promising ones that you've seen get a little bit more leg that solves the more urgent questions currently is one, leveraging AI to solve the fundamental kind of enduring questions tied to the use of blockchain in decentralized finance as more people are participating. So things like gas fees and the cost of compute and energy associated with each of these transactions, the kind of managing the data, the massive amount of data that you're creating on these ledgers as more people are participating, more transactions are occurring, thinking about kind of data storage and data analytics. And then the other thing that I start seeing that we really haven't talked a whole lot about is thinking about what does fraud and fraud detection look
Mm,
like, because we alluded it to earlier. You said that, sometimes because it's such a wild west of the frontier of this adoption, people are getting scammed, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you start doing that? And I think that, we ask this question because while AI is useful for solving a lot of the problems that are now emerging because more people are participating in this decentralized finance community, we're also seeing decentralized finance and blockchain enabled technology solving fundamental problems in AI. So, I alluded to zero gravity labs as an example earlier, where there's all small quantities and massive quantities of small amounts of compute. So high volumes of individuals own GPUs. That excess GPU isn't being leveraged because there's just not a really good way for major centralized organizations to see value in trying to tap into that. But you can see how something that is blockchain enabled can be able to facilitate that. The other thing that we've started seeing, at least from the AI, the frontier AI side, is there's a lot of questions about how do you start solving the fundamental problems of agentic action around finance. So if you said earlier, you can now get an agent to go out and buy something for you. And yes, you can. It's just traditional finance infrastructure is not suitable for the microtransactions that happen in the agentic workflow. So for example, if you say, Claude Code, create an agent for me that can go out and access APIs and do basic, comparisons between three different model providers. Every API access comes with a microtransaction. And these aren't even microtransactions are now. We're talking about I don't like nano transactions.
Mm-hmm.
And traditional finance infrastructure is suitable for microtransactions. In the last, 20 years, we've started creating the infrastructure for that. But at the rate of exchange that agents can operate at, traditional finance infrastructure is not suitable for it. There's just no way to be able to do that. So people have been looking to decentralize infrastructure and the decentralized community to figure out, can you do something to solve that intrinsic bottleneck in agentic AI being able to act and operate more efficiently?
Yeah. And I think you completely nailed the head. And I guess when I was speaking previously, I guess I was also coming at it from more of like the consumer end rather than somebody who's like building, right? But I mean, in terms of like just even financial artificial intelligence and more broadly for myself, even just like anything that is financially related using AI, right? In some way, shape, or form. That is just like how I look at the industry. But I mean, we're in a world right now, and I won't say any names, but I know a startup that has completely raised their round through AI. Not a single conversation
Yep.
happened at
Yep.
all. I know venture funds that have gotten completely rid of an investor community, like
Yep.
committee. Like they are just like, actually, they will make more consistent decisions than I will, right?
Yes.
So like, take away actually any of this.
Yeah. On
And
that
so,
side of like investors using, and you see these, right? Like fully agentic VC firm where AI makes the
yep,
decision. And I see that. And I start to wonder because there are, if you imagine, if your hypothesis is that an investor, a VC, is only valuable for the check they write, and portfolio companies, their entire success of a portfolio company is only on the portfolio company and there's no value you as an investor can add to it, then absolutely, I do agree that you can have fully agentic VC firms. I don't I don't think I agree with that. And maybe it's just my kind of clinging on to old ways. But I think that there are things about founders that you bet on that are not representative in the data that they can provide you at the time in which they make the investments. And sometimes the best founders are the worst pitchers.
completely. Absolutely. I mean, we go back and forth on this one too, because at the end of the day, and this is changing, right? Everything's changing. Every opinion that I have is maybe outdated the next day. And like
Yeah.
one of that is that like founders need to be able to sell, right? Is that true anymore? Can the AI do it for them? Right? And like,
I think that, maybe if you were doing B2C brute force high, ROI, return on ad spend type of marketing, I think that you can leverage a significant amount of AI to automate part of your workflow. But we're in this age where we're now being flooded with AI content. I mean,
yeah,
flooded with AI content. So, I think there's an intrinsic value in founders who, one, understand enough about cutting edge AI to know the opportunities and limitations and what is about to be released so that you can leverage the next great version of AI. And so that like awareness, that skill, that competency, it's very hard for agentic systems to kind of replicate and to kind of dominate because agentic systems really only know the data that's digitally available to them,
yep, and provided, yep,
provided to them. But there are a lot of companies creating solutions that I know of before it's ever been released in any media, even been
completely.
speculated, right? And so
Yeah.
then it's sort of like, okay, well, an adjacent system might be 95% good and keeping up to date on the cutting edge, but it's that extra 5% that generates the alpha on whether or not a founder is spectacular or average.
Yeah. And again, I think the good founder versus like maybe a weak founder, I mean, there's a lot of opinions on this, right? Like, as fund managers, we actually raise capital based on disagreeing with our counterpart, right? Like,
Yeah.
we all have our own opinions. I mean, throw 20 VCs in a room and everybody disagrees with one
Yeah.
another on like what works, what doesn't. Do I think, these firms that are completely getting rid of the human element? I mean, I'm not sure. Like, to your point, you're like, no, we need the human. There's like value to be provided. But I mean, maybe I have a lot of bias
Mhm.
that gets rid of that. Like I personally, I don't know, right? Like, can I automate myself? And I know a lot of firms that like I've automated connections, right? I've automated like most of the admin work. I'm not sure that I am necessary in this process, right? We have a lot, but so AI has bias too, right?
Yeah.
And I am like, it doesn't offend me if like, my role is also automated out, right? Like that gives me more time to do other things. As long as I mean, either way, it's our capital, right? So
Yeah.
like, if that makes me more money, then phenomenal, right? Like I am not gonna like have an ego about it and say that I can do this better than AI, especially, I mean, to be fair, I'm also a pre-seed investor. The data that we have on people is nothing, right? Like we are like also ideation stage, reading founders, a lot of like me and my co-general partner, sometimes we're in a room and we're like, we disagree with what we just took it differently.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
someone's vouching for them. I'm like, no, vice versa. Like we argue a lot, right? And
In
yeah,
your the stage that you operate in is probably less amenable to AI automation than the stage that a lot of investors in growth stage operate in, right? Because in growth
yeah,
stage there is a lot of data for you to underwrite. And in your there's a vibe, and I don't know how
yeah.
to underwrite a vibe.
But actually, my co-general partner and I, we talk about this quite a lot, actually, or we did. It's less of a conversation because I think originally, as an operator, right, like to your point of vibes, we kind of came almost the other way because I think when we speak to a person, we came to a point where we're like, do we just like them? Are they actually able to build this business?
Yeah.
Or do we just like them? And
Yes,
actually,
yes,
I
yes.
ran a model on our portfolio. I ranked founders on my personal opinion if I liked them or not. And I was like, I need to know this. This is important for pre-seed investors if we're investing in people. And unfortunately, the data suggests that the unlikable founders for me are performing better. That
Ah,
sucks. That's a terrible data point for me. And I think a lot of times it's like, if you're not laughing at my jokes, I probably don't like you, like just
is that
small
really what your
things.
data says, that your least likable founders are the ones that are most performant?
It's actually like slight. It's not like the most unlikable, but it,
Oh,
it
oh, oh,
skews
oh,
unlikable,
oh.
unfortunately.
But
But
likability depends on how you define it, I think, right?
it
Because
is completely,
I love founders who are so strong in their conviction that they will challenge you when
yeah.
they hear something. But then you can also see about like the balance of like coachability and whether or not
Mm.
somebody is willing to, in the face of data that contradicts what they believe, be able to amend their beliefs a little bit to reflect the validity of that data. And I think that that is just two ends of the spectrum. And whether you skew one way or another, some people like and some people don't. So that concept of likability is so
It's
abstract.
personal. It's very, very personal, right? And like each person then has to like put a number to things. Like it has to be systematic. And but where I argue that like, okay, if pre-seed investing is all network based, right? Like we are getting referrals from this person and this person, and my human error is whether or not I like them, right?
Yeah,
Maybe they
yeah,
can do like technology can do that better for me. Can I find people network to network states, right? I'm saying I actually don't have an opinion one way or the other, but I am now conscious of like, okay, they seemed arrogant and I don't like them for that reason, but can they build a company? Is
yeah,
that relevant to the fact that they can like do this? Do they have an ego for this reason or
yeah,
this reason, right? And so, I mean, to your point of vibes, there's so many. It's a soft algorithm at pre-seed of we're running all the time, right?
yeah,
Like, do they have traction? Like, I mean, you can't defend the product, but it's different. Like with a person and very little traction, it's like,
yeah.
do we have the quintessential belief that this individual will take over the world with this,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
like take
Yes.
over the industry.
Yep. We
And
had
unfortunately, yeah.
we had somebody who was a featured speaker, and he said his kind of three things that he kind of looks for is, when he looks at somebody, he says, do we fundamentally believe them, and that these three things will be true in 10 years. One
Mm,
is the market will be astronomically bigger and continue to be growing in 10 years, growing at a large rate being north of 10% compounded annual growth rate. Two is, will the technology that they're building still be cutting edge and resilient enough to outcompete in terms of technical moat whatever
mm,
is currently developed and might be developed in emerging technologies in now and in 10 years. And then last but not least is this the team to be able to build it now and endure enough that in 10 years they are still the team that somebody else would fresh bet on. And so I think that concept of what you said about like investing in that seed stage and just like understanding the potential and whether or not somebody can do what they say they are willing to do, sometimes that has nothing to do with likability, but it sure helps.
it helps, right? And even to your point of number two in that three-part thesis, I mean, I used to agree with everything you just said, but even now, point two, people are reverse vibe coding businesses. Technical moat is different now a lot of the times, depending
Yeah,
on what you're building,
I
right?
think
And it's like,
reverse vibe coding is such an interesting concept. It works if your innovation is in the business model innovation, if
yeah,
not so
you
much.
are a lot in deep tech, right? Like we also do things where like we do consumer businesses. We
Yeah,
do other things. We do things that are also still like technically like we do deep tech, we do other we see a spectrum of things. But I also think a technological moat means something different now than it
yeah,
did 5 years ago,
we,
right? And so it's just like the constant challenging like our own thesis, our own biases, like, and actually, I think more than anything else, to be good at investing at pre-seed, it's longevity. I think they say if you're in the valley for over 10 years, you make money, right? And like, depending on like, are you a good investor? Are you a bad investor? I mean, pre-seed, we're all gambling.
yeah,
If a pre-seed
yeah.
investor is telling me that they know that these companies are going to make it,
They have
no,
to
you
be
don't.
prophetic. They have to.
Yeah. Like, yeah.
Juliana, I want to be mindful of the time we've asked of you here.
Mm.
Let me ask you one last question about just you know where our students are at in their career and their journey in entrepreneurship and AI. If you had kind of just unlimited time, unlimited money, unlimited human capital resources and capabilities, and you were in our students' shoes, what would you build? What problem would you solve? What problem would you solve in the decentralized finance DFAI space?
Yeah. So I think this is kind of two part. And although like I am building in this space right now. And so even though I am installed, I am comfortable sharing like this is like there are numerous problems, right? And there will continue to be problems, but I see those as opportunities. For me specifically, unlimited time, unlimited resources. I mean, I'm looking into the problems of tackling, our financial sovereignty,
Mm,
right? And like what that looks like broadly, what it looks like decentralized, what it looks like with ownership. Who do we pay a loan to? Who do we pay mortgages to?
mhm.
Can we flip this model so that it works at a more network like state? Are incentives aligned? I think
Yeah.
incentive alignment is really important, right? Like if people are properly incentivized in theory, things work better.
So more on that, like in that kind of like decentralized network state, we're
Mm.
talking instead of your finances flowing through centralized organizations, can you start thinking about peer to peer? Can you start thinking about other individuals participating in that economics that don't have to rely on centralized infrastructure?
Yeah, completely. It's kind of reliant on the fact of who's the blocker, right? Like, who
Mhm.
is the third party centralized system that is preventing me from raising more capital or like getting more money? Or is it properly there?
Yeah,
Has anybody questioned the system of, okay, on chain credit, off chain credit? Like, we're seeing a separation of sorts. Like, where's the middle ground? And
yeah,
where can we get this where it works for individuals, works for institutions, investors, where it works on a more level field?
yeah, absolutely. I see. I see. Students, you heard from Juliana. If you had unlimited time and money, could you choose DFAI to solve the problem of what does personal financial sovereignty look like. And however you just want to decide on to solve that problem, if that's an area that you are doing, please, this is a challenge that Juliana has tasked us with.
Also, yeah, if you have ideas, if you're building in it, reach out to me. If you have a startup in this category, if you are like tackling the topic, I would honestly love to speak with you. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I think more than anything, if you have unlimited time, if you have unlimited resources, but also if you don't, just start.
Just do it. Just start.
Just
Start.
start. Yeah.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you so much. We so deeply appreciate your time, the walkthrough, you tolerating some of my very just naive questions around what this industry and means and this community means. I know that these concepts are going to continue to evolve as the decentralized community evolves and changes. But for now, we just feel like we're so lucky to have this snippet and the snapshot of what the community means through your lens and through your expertise. Thank you so much. We so appreciate your time.
I really appreciate your time. And, for the listeners out there, again, don't get bogged down in jargon. I mean, there's so much opportunity out there. Don't let fear prevent you from building amazing things and investing in things. Now we have more opportunity than ever, especially cross-border. Thank you so much. And apologize for speaking fast. I think I
No,
probably
no,
strayed. I think we took this conversation maybe a different way, but I think it was a interesting conversation for me as well to have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Students, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the AI Sana podcast. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.